Hello, welcome to this new episode of the Alex Show TV. And as you can see, I have a guest, and I'm very pleasure and honored to have Seth Perisben from the US on the show here. Thank you, Seth, for accepting my invitation.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Alex. How are you tonight?
Thank you. I found Seth researching on a topic that I've shared many times on the show that I'm very fond of. Not in a good way, but I'm very fond of. It's very interesting to me. This topic of fungi, mold, mushrooms, all of these, which I've shared that I don't believe they are necessarily here from Earth originally, or they have mixed with some Earth species in a way. And Seth has done such a great investigation on fungi that, Seth, without further ado, what can you tell us about fungi, mold, and these kind of entities?
Yeah, so I think that they're one of the earlier forms of biology that made it to land. That's kind of out there in the data and the knowledge out there. I would say that they are very close to being, like most advanced life in their own way. They're a eukaryotic cell, so they're different than like a bacteria, virus. They're a little more complex cell like ours are in a way. And they're everywhere. They've proliferated. They're across the whole planet. They're in the soil. They're in the air. The spores. They're basically something that's ubiquitous in the environment. So that means because of exposure, they're also something that can affect humans pretty sneakily and pretty extensively, depending on what predispositions you might have. But there are differences too that are worth noting. So I'm not really focused as much on the toadstool type growth mushrooms or fungi. I'm more focused on what people would consider yeast or mold, and particularly ones that can invade the human body and kind of set up a operation, in so to speak, in the host, being us, and then they can proliferate and extend that presence in the host to kind of take over processes and slowly kind of whittle away at things like immunity and certain functions and processes in the body biologically, neurochemically. They can affect all those things. So I would say, I know that you have mentioned just a moment ago that there's some concern that you've had that they might not be from here,
Mhm.
terrestrial in origin. I would say that there's a split. I think that there are some that are behaviorally, they're so different, biologically and behaviorally, and what they do in a host or in the environment. Those are the ones I focus on. So there are others that are kind of just, I would say, less intrusive. They're definitely not invasive to humans. Still toxic to some degree, depending on how sensitive you are, of course. But even something you would think of like a standard mushroom off the shelf at the supermarket might have something that you would be reactive to, or it's not going to set up shop and infect you, but the toxins would still be active to some degree, like inflammation vectors and so on. When you look at the ones that I study specifically, so I would say as a couple examples for anyone that's wanting to look further, Candida albicans, everyone
Mhm.
kind of knows that one from out there in health, and another one's Aspergillus fumigatus is another one that's a big one right now in my world, and Cryptococcus neoformans or Gattii. Gattii. That's one that you can check out. Those are very close, but those are all invasive to humans. They do a few really specific processes that, if you aren't used to seeing them or looking at it, it's really going to throw you for a loop. So, we think yeast is that common, mother cell creates a daughter cell that splits off to then make more daughter cells, and ad nauseum, until it just keeps going and takes over a colony, or becomes a colony, I should say. Ones like Candida albicans, they have a switch that can happen where they can actually change morphology or shape to better invade the host and acquire more resources even faster. So it's kind of this buildup and this challenge to our biology, and it's kind of leveraging a lot of switches. So things that we need for resources, it can take just as much because it's so close to us in biology. And they'll actually switch form from that mother to daughter cell. Instead of taking that daughter cell and splitting it off, they'll turn it into like a little kind of a spike. They call it a hyphae. So they'll create a little spike, and sometimes those spikes connect to other spikes, and that creates this network inside you or I if you have that type of infection. So those ones, I question some of their origin points because there's so much biological exchange between these species, even the ones you wouldn't think are related or doing anything to each other. They still exchange a lot of chemistry and signaling. So looking at, say, Cryptococcus, I'll use that one as an example. I've brought this up before online a few times. There's a pretty good model for panspermia with Cryptococcus neoformans coming in potentially, I should say, I always leave that gap, but potentially coming in on a larger meteor, bolide, and then entering a waterway. And then the next year, there's actually a large outbreak of Cryptococcus neoformans in the area that these bolides came down. And where I'm talking about right now is actually Vancouver, British Columbia. So in 1998, there were 3 of these very noteworthy fireballs that came in, large bolides that came in over Vancouver. And as far as the studies I've been able to find on this, which are like NASA related or type studies on these coming in, they hit a waterway. And the next year, so this model would be large bolide can carry some things inside it, let's say, microbes, maybe sometimes there's liquid water, other things. There's a couple of recent examples of this popping up as far as being more accepted that microbial life can transport on that type of structure, on that type of meteor. So if it hits a waterway, and Cryptococcus is actually found in water a lot to begin with, it's one that can sporulate and grow underwater and then infect a host by you aspirating. Okay, so it can still hit you. In 1999, so the year after those bolides came in, there's a huge outbreak of Cryptococcus goti. I said neoformans, but they're so close you can barely tell except for like 1 or 2 tests. So Cryptococcus goti is what had an outbreak in 1999 in Vancouver. So the same spot these meteors came in, a year later, there's this huge outbreak, and they've never explained the outbreak, not to anyone's satisfaction. And it's a very odd fungus to outbreak in the northern climes. So it really stands out, and you can start seeing that there are species and sometimes what they call a clade. So a clade is like a CLADE. Clade is like a different section or different. It's like a slightly different genome compared to the previous run of that species you saw. So you might call it like a mutant or something like that variety of this particular fungus. And those pop up a lot. So there'll be something that we're already familiar with, like Candida auris, which I don't talk about that one as much, but Candida auris is a newer one that's causing a lot of problems in the medical community. And that had 5 or 6 clades kind of show up simultaneously across the globe. And that hasn't really been explained extremely well. So you'll see trends like that. Bear with me, I'll take a sip real quick.
Yes, no worries.
So you'll see trends like that where something kind of stands out. And the Vancouver situation kind of turned my eye to checking other occurrences of large bolides to try and look for things that might show a pattern. And one of the things that myself and some others in my group that I study this with noticed is that there was a slight uptick in birth rate in these areas. Say I think it's Chelyabinsk, I think is the one in Russia, where they had all the windows break out from that meteor going
Yes, I
right over.
remember.
Yeah,
2013.
yeah, that's exactly right. So
Mhm.
if you notice, if you go and look at the birth rates in these areas, and Vancouver, you can do this too, you'll see a little uptick real quick after these bolides come over, and then it dips kind of progressively and steadily. It does level off, don't get me wrong, but it does kind of dip. So there's a little increase and then a dip, like something happened with immune function maybe, because that's tied really heavily to birth rate stuff, of course. So you can kind of see these trends, and I'm not saying anything definitive in particular, of course. These are a lot more study than what I can give it myself. But these are trends I'm seeing where it's like, okay, maybe this is something that's coming in from, in the solar system, I believe, but off planet. Let's say something that's either, the belt of asteroids we have in between us and the larger planets. Saturn is another suspect that we talk about a lot in my study as a long theory, but it's something where if you think about the timing of some things that changed on Earth, and you look at some things that potentially changed around Saturn around the same time, you would see that Saturn supposedly lost a large moon, planetoid-sized moon, and they kind of pin that on where the rings originated from. Okay, so it got pulled into the gravity well, shattered, and now it's a bunch of rings of dust and asteroids and everything else around Saturn instead of being a cohesive moon. And that happened roughly 100 million years ago, maybe a touch longer, but roughly 100 million years ago. Now, if you think about how things travel through space, it could take, several, maybe tens of millions of years to make its way to our position, depending on how that dust all spirals out. But you can kind of see around that time frame, maybe 30 million years later, there's something we all know about with dinosaurs dying off, like real quick. Something happened, they were here for an extremely long period of time, and all of a sudden everything just nosedives and they're gone, and other things start taking over on the planet as far as other forms of life. So a lot of people think that that's because, the sun got blocked out and they lost their food supply or whatever it might be, that, the meteor that hit caused a massive amount of damage. Of course, there's impact, death, and everything else. So, that would go along with this. But they started looking closer at dinosaurs that died around that time, shortly after around that time of the meteor that supposedly impacted. And they thought there was a lot of damage on these vertebrae of the neck from like brontosaurus size dinosaurs, that type. They thought it was predator damage because it was on the inside of the neck, not on the back. So they thought it was a bite damage. And they looked at it closer, maybe 2-3 years ago, I think is when this popped up. And they actually found that it looked like it was because of an invasive fungus that had taken over their throat, their body, and now it got so bad it degraded their bone structures and left marks, like lesions in the bone. So you can kind of see how that idea of, maybe Saturn had this incident, flung a bunch of stuff that was from originally around it, and it developed around it, and then it just flings that out into the solar system, and we're riding a wave that eventually catches some of that dust every once in a while. And that would fit this model of these things being very odd compared to the rest of the fungi that people usually think about when they think of fungi and mushrooms and everything. They have some really odd traits where, besides the morphology, the shape changing they can do, they can survive radiation, like extremely high radiation. And in fact, it makes them more effective at gathering resources because of that damage that's happening. So, going with this idea you and I are kicking around of them maybe originating off planet for this type of yeast mold fungi, that's pretty realistic with that capability they have to essentially eat radiation or survive off it and make themselves stronger with. Because if you're floating around in space unshielded from a planetary or moon atmosphere, you're going to get bombarded all the time. But of course, you're still initially, especially, you're looking at needing to gain more resources. There could have been. I think we all kind of know at this point that Saturn's got a pretty high radiation signature from what they've measured going by it, so that could factor as well. Maybe there's this constant field they were exposed to before that incident with that moon pulling apart. So there's a bunch of things that stand out that kind of do point to that potential panspermia model with this type of fungi.
Yes, yes. If you think about it, radiation, even from incidents here on Earth, of course, it eventually causes death, but it excites organisms, living organisms, before it kills them. If you think about it, and as you say, it makes a lot of sense to me that for them to survive from Saturn to Earth, I mean, just think about the oxygen situation, probably none or very little. For them to come here and be able to thrive, just makes me think that is something that I think we are not really prepared to. I do believe mold, particularly, and fungi, maybe mushrooms, as you say, the regular mushrooms we eat, portobellos and that. But especially mold, black mold in houses, that happens a lot during moist and situations with a lot of humidity and darkness and that. We don't understand it, and I personally feel, as I reject it completely, and I reject all kind of fungi. They are toxic to me because I probably have issues with that. I understand. I'm sensitive to that, but for me, there's something else going, that they're very parasitic. It seems they don't get along. Seems like when you see mold spreading to a house, it's so parasitic. They're gonna take over in a way that tells me they're not here with the best intentions in a way, as a species. Okay.
Yeah, it's almost like they, and we make this reference jokingly, of course, because there's a lot to the whole idea, but we've discussed them in my group as being like a physical representation of entropy in a way. Like entropy in the body, entropy of the system that we're existing in, as like, let's just say the planet itself that we're on. They're part of that, degradation entropy aspect, the change that's not necessarily, like you say, not necessarily doing something beneficial. They're just pulling resources, and actually, it's funny that you mentioned that there are some that go wild here with radiation on the planet. If you look at Chernobyl, okay,
Yes.
so that's a big one. Chernobyl has that elephant foot reference thing, that's where the actual melt happened inside the reactor area. And they talk about this fungus that is extremely good at essentially ingesting radiation. And it does it by becoming extremely melanistic. So really, it's this type of melanin that humans don't make, it's like, really super, super dark melanin. It's like a blue-black kind of color. And that allows them to kind of shield themselves from radiation, but also redirect it certain ways when the colony is established the right way. And that it just so happens that species at Chernobyl that's doing that is the one I just told you about, Cryptococcus. So it's right there. I mean, it's like, this is not like my model. It sounds funny for people at first when I start talking panspermia and fungi and invasive to the human body, and like slow motion cordyceps is how we talk about it a lot in my circle. And people kind of flinch or, say that you can see it get disregarded pretty quickly. And it does happen a lot. I think it's because we've kind of been turned away from understanding it because it's just so prevalent, has been there for so long before it even became something that could think about science, let's say. At the level we do now as humanity, like we had no idea this thing was doing what it was doing, or these uh, fungi, the multiple groups that are already out there were doing what they were doing, as well as the ones I study, which again, the more you look at them, like you say, the more it kind of takes this trend that there's something not beneficial, not just for us, but I think, across all environments and all life they can impact. I think it's not a good relationship. It's not a positive to host relationship in any way. Very parasitic, like you're saying. And one example of that, you're mentioning mold quite a bit, specifically, but it's a lot of those old school mycology references. You would hear mold, like mold in the cold, and yeast in the heat is how these usually go. So the lower the temperature, the mold form happens and starts this invasion to seek out more and more resources from the area. And then when it gets warm again, it will go to yeast form to make those buds and then pop off, or make spores and then head off across wherever it's going to set up the next shop, so to speak. The ones that I study are completely contrary to that rule. So instead of mold in the cold and yeast in the heat, they're primarily yeast form at the lower temperatures. And as they increase in temperature, then they become invasive. And what's interesting about that is Candida, that I mentioned earlier on, that has that form where it'll make the spike, that spike is a mycelial growth. That hyphal network is really a mycelial growth. They have a switch that they're kind of programmed for biologically of 95 degrees Fahrenheit. And then they make that change. So if you're thinking about the human body or mammals in general, that 95-degree Fahrenheit switch is going to be pretty handy if you're a yeast that wants to then go hyphal to take more resources from that host that you're in. So there's kind of this programming that's opposite what we think of normal yeasts and molds, So, and again, it's this thing where you can see, like you're saying, with the kind of uncomfortableness, like there's not a good, and I hesitate to say intent. We can get to that in a second. I do think there's something behind the scenes a bit with these possibly. That's really extended model stuff. But, when you look at the way that they're impacting anything that they're in, there's no benefit at all there. So we get this term commensal that you hear a lot, which means usually that they can exist in the host, draw resources, but not cause harm. I would counter that with they're always looking to pull extra, more than what they need. Like it's not just a commensal thing where there's like a nice even exchange and they might take just what's available that's not being used by you and out in your environment, like your myco or microbiome. They'll actually forcibly take resources from the host. They do a bunch of different things to take care of that. So I think that there's something to the idea that there's I don't want to say a hard line consciousness like what you and I would consider maybe mammals and humans and others like that to have a consciousness, but there is something there. There is something operating, and it's getting to be more well known with fungi that there's like a semblance of every tick box you can think of for what we would consider consciousness. You can find some matches over in fungi, in particular the ones I study. So there is something to that idea that there's a substrate of cells, that there's some type of electrical and chemical activity in, and it's causing that entity or colony to perform certain actions at certain times, kind of like we do. So if you look at how we would, I'm going to jump into some deeper stuff here. If you look at how we consider consciousness, and I go in directions people don't always agree with this, but I look a lot at how we, most of us, consider there to be something that's probably beyond the material. As far as consciousness and why we think and are and everything else, a lot of us accept now, or at least are starting to more, that there's something beyond just the material, like you and I sitting here and talking on our machines back and forth doing this video for your podcast. There's more to that. There's above that, and these would kind of have that potential as well in my model. So you and I have these networks of neurons and cell connections and communications. And our consciousness is kind of what reports the changes and control of that, right, back and forth, and there's something above that that's kind of driving the bus, so to speak. This is very similar in these species I study. So you end up with a substrate of cells that, again, they have certain characteristics that mimic all those things. So, chemical changes, electrical changes, and they do kind of like they'll split off inside the host. They'll split off from like the main colony and distribute throughout the body, become disseminated basically. And then if they meet up again, they'll start sharing information that they have found about where resources are in the host. So it's very similar to slime molds or an amoeba, let's say. So they're really close to that type of existence that we've already out there in the general knowledge of science. We've already started to assign some level of consciousness to these things. So I can see you having that feeling, like that intent, or something's going on there that's not quite exactly what's on the surface with them. Yeah.
Yes, especially with mold. First of all, this is very weird, but I felt all my life they kind of follow you. I know this is very strange, but you find them everywhere, in my office, in my house, and I seem to be able to feel them all the time. Does it make sense? And you feel this, how do you say, this kind of hive intention, or that there's energetically there's something there that they're trying to, in a way, and you very difficult to explain and not in a rational way, but you feel they have a parasitic intention. That's, remember I shared that with you, that I feel
Yeah.
mold and fungi and parasites and all these, they have a, in a way, they seem to be connected to something we don't understand. That's why I feel they come from outside Earth. I do believe black mold, particularly, it's a silent killer. First of all, it's many people have them in their house. There are many stories out there of people that they just get immediate health problems, speedy cancers, or they just died outright, heart attacks, and that they had, especially hidden mold, what it's called, that it's not apparent. It's beyond panels or inside the walls or something, and that's why I always share this fact that if you're in a house that has mold, either get rid of it or get out of the house, because it's something that I think we still don't understand how hard it is on us. And it's not only the pulmonary effects, the coughing, I think it goes beyond that. I think it's really something that, a lot of people get ill and they don't know that is related to the mold in their homes, particularly.
Yeah, it's you're pointing to something that I've had quite a bit of thought in on, with what we in the phenomenon circle kind of call the hitchhiker effect. So you say that you've had this general, sense that they kind of go with, like sometimes even if you move house, you'll see that, that one pops up it's kind of in the same area it was in
And
my
you
other
see a
house, but
little piece in the corner,
yeah,
and you,
yeah,
okay,
yeah,
you're
exactly.
here. Yeah.
So you hear this hitchhiker effect, and if you think about what you just kind of outlined, so I explained the substrate that set up shop in the body, all right, in the host as like this colony. Okay, I say substrate because let's say, and I'm just going for an extreme example. I'm not saying this is how it would work out, but it's just kind of to balloon the theory a little bit. You and I are hanging out in person, okay, and I have some version of this that you don't have, of these fungi, and somehow that becomes something that you pick up just breathing a spore or whatever is in the area, let's say, and then let's say I'm an experiencer of some type, because you hear about that a lot. You'll have entities that attach themselves to people, and that's where the hitchhiker effect idea comes from, right? So let's say that that's something that's external, like a consciousness that doesn't reside directly in that substrate every single moment, and you pick it up from me as a contagion, and then you go back to your place, 1,000 miles away, wherever, and now all of a sudden you start having some weird experiences with entities that you weren't having experiences with before we hung out in person. That's the hitchhiker effect in my kind of expanded model. So, and what that's really doing, because you have your own set of microtubules, I have my own set of microtubules, so to speak. I'm just going to really simplify this, but for me and my model of human consciousness, my idea of it, that's like a kind of key, like a one-to-one key. So you've got your one-to-one key, so to speak. I've got my one-to-one key, and those are kind of matched biologically, and also like what our signal is for our consciousness, like the EM field and everything else, I think is part of this picture. So now take that same set of traits and apply that to these fungi we're talking about. So now you have this report back and forth from their structures and their microtubules, because they do have their own microtubule very close to our microtubule structures that everything in their cells are made of, almost like neurons. So now you've got something that could almost behave in that manner, but it's not as keyed one-to-one as you and I, because their cells are the same, like any yeast or mold. Okay, so it's always the same exact cell, even if it's in a host and it's tuned itself differently. So you can see now that hitchhiker idea, kind of the longer version of it, where you have a substrate that you picked up from me, and that consciousness that can dial to that type of microtubule setup is now able to dial to yours, because it's over in you now, wherever you went back to home. And you'll hear this too, like some agents that have worked in the field have reported, being at a site or investigating something. They pick up a hitchhiker, and then they go home, and all of a sudden their family starts having that same set of weird experiences. It's not super common, but you can find the stories if you dig. And that's, I think, part of that extended model. So they're basically picking up a contagion, what we consider a contagion on the surface, these invasive fungi that no one really thinks real hard about in the medical community. And then you've got this thing that's happening where you've picked up that infection, so to speak, and that entity that's usually attached to it would be able to just piggyback as a hitchhiker. I think that's the extension of that whole idea that you're getting at with, feeling like there's something kind of, like I say, it's hard to put your finger on it. It's hard to say it rationally. And that's why I keep going back to the best example that you have in public knowledge, common knowledge, is that subway experiment that I made reference to, where what they did there is they took that subway map of Japan and they put all the major hubs, they put food or like resources basically for fungi at each of the hubs that were the major ones in Japan. And they kind of set the slime mold on its way. And it actually made a better subway route than what the Japanese government had come up with. So something, even though it's just, to us, it looks like just resource acquisition, there's something driving those processes. And they can, like I say, they take a break from each other, they'll come back together and share the information again. Slime molds do that. And slime molds, just to explain why I'm bringing them up so much, slime molds are basically an amoeba of sorts. So it's like one membrane, a large single membrane with a bunch of biological activity internally. So, nuclei, mitochondria, all that stuff is all in those slime molds. And that's how an amoeba behaves too. It has one large membrane, a bunch of stuff going on in there biologically. It all cooperates. When you look at like Candida albicans or Cryptococcus or any of these, it's the same idea. They're even sometimes called amoeba in a tube. You'll hear that for Candida albicans. So it's just like an amoeba, but it's like a non-planktonic mold type form. So that's where I'm saying these are all really, really close. And I think that there's a gap in knowledge that we need to start addressing. I see it in the medical side all the time, let alone even bridging into this stuff you and I are talking about with like phenomenology and experiencing things that you can't quite explain.
Okay. I think you mentioned one that it's most people have a lot of interest in is Candida albicans. Is that the right name?
Albicans, yeah.
Albicans, yes.
Yeah.
That's the one a lot of doctors or people that have investigated this say it's fueled by sugar. Is that, do you feel it's correct? Or
I think that's like that would be a good example of kind of like a substrate it can pull from before it invades the host fully. So it does, yeah. I mean, it definitely does acquire resources that are excess to you. Sugar's one of them. There's some simple carbohydrates, like grain-related stuff that they are really good at taking up. But they're really always there to invade you. It's what they're tuned for. They can acquire those resources, but they're preferential to yours. They have a bunch of really specific processes where they're aiming at your mitochondria basically all the time. And what I would say for people to check on their own out there, if you look up Candida lysin, so just like it sounds, it's Candida lysin, Lysin. That's a chemical that Candida albicans and some other species in that genus make, but it's specific to basically cutting a little hole in our cell membrane. And it does that to steal, or essentially acquire, I should say, is a better way to say it, but to acquire the host calcium so it can process that into energy. So it's like, I don't want to say it's milking us for our calcium ions, but it essentially is. It has a little, that spike I talked about earlier that it turns the daughter cell into, and it starts that mold type invasion in the host. The first step that really makes is going right through our membrane into the mitochondria to get those resources. And it's preferential to that. It has, when you really start digging into it, it has so many stages and steps of approach to taking things from the host, avoiding the immune system responses, causing inflammation, to then generate other damages that it can take advantage of the end result of those damages, and it it can degrade. You hear a lot in the Candida world, it can degrade tight junctions in our cells in the gut. So that's something a lot of people miss, is that these are actually very good at invading. So it will do so, and it'll start just taking those resources. I think sugar is a concern, but less than taking, the sugar out of the diet, let's say, which a lot of people do, and it does help. I think maybe there's something to be said for trying to address anything that's like a latent or ingrained type of infection, which, just speaking from my own perspective, having a particular syndrome, it's called APECED, APECED, and there's some fractional parts of that disease predisposition, but that's something where those are set up very, very early. And I think you would see that as a reflected thing in lots of other people that don't have the level of predisposition that gets so that you can't really even eat fungi like you and me. So you still have, like, smaller presentations of that, but those are always able to get in some door. Candida, especially albicans, is always able to get in some door. If it's not wide open like mine, there's little, pieces that can find that gap, so to speak, and then kind of ride that one little hitch in somebody's immune system and then get past the gate and start setting up shop kind of permanently. So, to your point about, and the point that's usually made out there about Candida albicans and sugar and diet, it is important, but I think it's also, in my model, important to try to kind of modulate the biome a bit, to take care of yourself. It's just a matter of trying to be healthier, like exercise or anything else. You should be paying attention to what's going on in your internals. It's just advisable for everybody out there, I think. So you can kind of pay attention to that enough and kind of alter the way that you're drinking in food or behaving, or maybe sometimes supplements, as something I run into a lot in my world, to kind of tamp that level down. Just kind of not let it have as free a ride, is the way I would say it to you, Alex. Yeah.
Yes,
Yep.
yes. For me personally, I'm originally from Italy, so olive oil is a big deal there as far as, but not olive oil as cooking oil, olive oil to be taken, directly in the morning raw, just
Mhm.
basically a teaspoon or a tablespoon, more than a teaspoon, a tablespoon. I also taken a lot of coconut oil and probiotics,
Yep.
acidophilus, and those kind of things. So I think it's, I've heard this notion, I know you have heard of it, that Candida albicans, it's not that you need to have some of it, but it's normal to have a percentage of it. And if you totally wipe it out, maybe some other stuff can take over. I don't know what you have heard of that.
Well, I have heard, yeah, I don't fully agree with that, which I know is contrary to what some people would say, but I've seen enough in the model over the past 3.5 years now, looking at just pretty much, that species as my primary and a couple others that are in the mix. I would say it's um, really shouldn't be there in the host to begin with. It gets in so early that I think that's why we have accepted it as being a standard for, you're supposed to, or it's acceptable to have a certain level, like you're saying. But I think that that's really because the immune uh, dysbiosis, essentially, the issues that pop up because of fungi being present in the system, um, doing some genetic damages, for example, because of the way that their toxins work, they can lesion our genome. So there's things that are getting damaged in there. And some of this goes all the way back to the womb, not just for people that are in my bracket, because of that APECED thing is, I usually notice that just as a prenatal disease is how it's really noted. And then, you see the symptoms early in life and whatnot. But even without that in the mix, they're still finding, I think the one I looked at yesterday was Aspergillus and Fusarium, which is another species or genus a lot of people look at for invasive fungi. They're finding that at pretty high percentages, and I'm saying in the double digits, like high double digits, like 70 percentile. They're finding those toxins from those species in the amniotic fluid, so in the amniotic sac, which means it's already in there doing some form of damage to, most likely it's, doing some damage to the immune system, whether it's really targeted by those toxins or those colonies specifically, hard to say. It looks like it's got a pretty good target because it goes for real specific parts of our genome, of our, DNA. But that's an example of how early this stuff is affecting us. So I think the idea of Candida being in the body as a normal thing is just because we didn't know that it shouldn't be there because it's in so early. And as far as things that happen when you take it out, we have the study group that I'm in, we have a lot of attempts that we've made to try and track those things as we've tried to correct our biome and correct our diets and so on. And we all check each other's notes, and we check with our doctors and stuff like that to make sure everything's, kind of kept above board and tracked right. And we see a lot of drops, in the presence of these fungi that are considered to be standards. Some people have zeros after a few months of the work that we go through with them to kind of show them like, okay, this might be the concern. And then we kind of track through these markers, and it ends up clearing itself out. And it's, to their benefit as they report, because this is all very like, self-reporting, self-sharing, kind of developing our own theory and really studying kind of like a pre-peer, I guess is how I would say. It's like an open research group is what we really try and do with it. And we're just kind of running those studies by each other and those results and everything else, and just constantly checking up on where everyone's at for information. And we see these steady downturns, as people progress. And then all the other markers that you would normally look at for the related response in the body to these fungi being present to begin with, all stabilize and go back to being homeostatic. So there's not peaks and dips and things that are getting maneuvered by parts of your biome that maybe shouldn't be there as heavily as we've accepted. So yeah, I would say, I do know of it. I don't really agree with that entirely, going by
Yes,
what modeling
yes.
built.
Well, I guess what I've heard of it is that, as you say, is more accepted in a way. Is not, don't try to get to zero because it must exist there in a little form. It just seems to be, don't go to the edges. Don't be fully full of candida, because then you get a lot of problems, including, I mean, some people say cancer, for example. Or don't go to the other level of trying to get rid of all of it, because then like it's too good, especially gut, what it's called, not bacteria, but it's called the flora, no? The gut flora, the probiotics and all that, and don't try to overdo it. So what I do with probiotics is I take 3 months, I take a month off. So in a way, if it's kind of overdoing it, it's gonna take care of it on its own. And I don't know, it's, for me, it has worked. I wanted to ask you, Seth, about something. This I'm gonna go a little bit out there, but I do feel there's something to it. You feel that fungi and mold and mushrooms and all of these have to do with emotions in the body of people, that what I'm trying to say is that maybe, again, I'm going a little bit out there, but these kind of parasites, because they are, in my opinion, they are parasites, they make us more evil, maybe. I know this is a
Well,
little bit out there. Sorry about
well,
that.
I can see where you're coming from. What I would say is the way they steer our neurochemistry, that's probably not entirely inaccurate in the response that we interpret as, good versus bad, let's say. I think that the impacts are what we have kind of steered ourselves to interpret emotionally as that. So you talk inflammation in the brain, you talk chemical imbalances like amine imbalances, so like, serotonin imbalances or melatonin issues. Sometimes if you really dig deep into the damage that happens in the gut because of candida, for example, and a couple other that ride off the back of that, they can actually turn your chemistry heavily towards overproducing serotonin. And then that leads to, because of the way that our system is set up, or then the way they interact with amines in our system, tryptophan basically becomes serotonin through a couple processes, and serotonin can be processed further by microbes in the gut, and it becomes a chemical called bufotenin. And bufotenin is, you would think of like toads is one that produces bufotenin. Some mushrooms, some like Amanita muscaria is one that has a couple compounds. One of them is bufotenin, and that's a fungal amine that is like very, very close to what we have for a natural neurochemical in our body that we produce on our own, dimethyltryptamine. They're literally one chemical chain different. So you can see how these are steering. They take our tryptophan, move it to serotonin, and then there's a couple steps, like I say, to get to this bufotenin loop. And when you look at the studies, if you want to go on the extreme side of emotional disturbance that might happen because of neurochemical changes, they have found really high rates of bufotenin in urine samples from depression patients, schizophrenic patients, and autism spectrum disorder patients. Those three show very high levels of bufotenine versus other standard neurochemistry that we should be producing. Because if you think about it and you look at it real quick, probably some of the people out there in the audience are hearing me say that bufotenine happens inside the human body, and that's throwing a flag for people because you don't really hear that very much. But go and look it up. Look up any of those three issues, the depression, the schizophrenia, or ASD, along with bufotenine, you'll see that's getting highlighted more and more as like the potential issue chemical, so to speak, in that whole loop of the emotional side of the disturbances and those syndromes. So I do agree with what you're saying. There's something that it does for steering. We happen to, as humans with emotions, we interpret it as something that might be on the negative side that we're getting steered towards as far as bad emotions, not good is another way I would say it. And, I could probably one up you on the going out there part, because part of what I really see is happening with this model that we're talking about right now is there's a kind of a biologically coded struggle between light and dark in a way. These fungi function better in the dark. They function better, in kind of opposite ways that we do. Some of the chemistry is the same, but they can, survive in lowered oxygen, for example. So there's a lot of these contrasts that happen. And I would say this kind of interaction, or this kind of constant play between that light and dark biological element that's going on internally. They're more tuned for, getting better returns off UV in that scale because of the way we talked about virulence things earlier. And our mitochondria are kind of tuned towards, infrared, so more on the red spectrum towards that end of the light and frequency bands. And you'll see that split a lot if you dig further in the work. Like I'm more recently been looking into like biophotonic activity of pathogens and parasites versus healthy human cells. And when you look at what's being produced by those two sides of the coin, so to speak, parasites and fungi and disease type stuff, cancer even, will usually display what's referred to as a blue shifted or like a UV sided kind of biophotonic activity. And it's starting to measure this more reliably now too. I know it's kind of a really left of center field for a long time, but now it's getting more headway. And when you look at higher consciousness things like humans, we're more towards redshifted biophotonic activity, so more on that infrared and further out on the red scale. So there are definite differences that I think would play into what you're getting at, where there's like this I don't want to say jockeying, but kind of steering a little bit at these very small levels along the way towards this is the outcome. And that's kind of what happens with these in the body when they're too prevalent, is what I would say.
Yes, I suggested that because I've heard stories that especially I'm going really out there now, but stuff like ayahuasca, you probably heard about this
Sure.
kind of stuff,
Yeah.
which is technically a mushroom or
Yeah, it's on the plant side. It does produce an amine. So go ahead though. I'll pull something up real quick here.
no, it's I've heard the stories ayahuascas and here we have, you probably heard of peyote, right?
Yep.
And for some it has a more spiritual or more balanced experience, but for some has a really, I don't want to call it evil, but really intense experience of darkness, of really finding the darker side, which I think there's something there that kind of gets some elements of our brain going off. I personally have been asked about it because, again, my channel has a lot to do with that kind of stuff. Not ayahuasca, but experiences, spiritual experiences, and that. And I say I don't suggest it at all because I believe you can achieve that, the good experiences, in other ways, but you're at risk that you're going to have a bad example of it, and it gets really rough. And actually, I believe I've heard the experiences of people with ayahuasca experiences that they are damaged forever. Okay,
Right.
they basically don't get off of it. They change and that's for me is concerning. Okay. Sorry about
So
that.
when you look at the chemical, it's a little different than our version of these amines, but I do know what you're getting at with the sometimes this bad result that you end up with
Exactly.
from these ayahuasca experiences. And I believe we're going to find, and I'm just pulling this up real quick on my end, because I want to make sure before I misspeak. So it turns out that that chemical I mentioned a moment ago, bufotenin,
Okay.
That's actually showing as the primary chemical. Ayahuasca is rich in bufotenine, a psychoactive substance that is also found in the latex of tahini trees, toads, and some fungi. So that's another one that's a good example here. I talked about Amanita muscaria, which is kind of known in a lot of these experience circles and religious circles around fungi, because it has some chemicals that people will utilize in these ceremonial things like you're talking about, these ceremonial events and practices. And it shows up in paintings, even like religious paintings from like, I believe, Christianity at a minimum, way back. And you look at it and you think of, everyone's seen this mushroom. It's the one you think of like Mario, Super Mario mushroom, the one that's the
Oh, yes,
red with
yes.
the white spots and everything.
I know what
So
you're talking about.
yeah, so that has bufotenine in it, which is that chemical I was just telling you a moment ago that our body gets twisted into synthesizing internally in those depressive and schizophrenic and autistic concerns, on that negative, that undesirable neurochemical result. So yeah, I mean, I can see how that would result in some bad experience. You're basically tuning your dial to something else's amine setup is what I see that as. It's and this is a really rough way to say it, and I'll probably catch some flack, but I'll say it anyway. I see the way that amines interact with the body as the same way, or roughly the same way as like a tuner, like a dial on a radio tuner, okay, is. So we have, like you said, you can go without all of this and you can still achieve these states if you work hard enough, meditate or pray or whatever your method is. If you work hard enough at that, you can open that gate internally. That's built into there with our natural amine, with high level amine, which is dimethyltryptamine. There's some release when you meditate and everything else. That spirit molecule, I believe that's tied to that as much as it is anything else in the body when that response happens. So that's our dial. That's like our tuned in spot for human consciousness, or maybe mammal consciousness, on that dial. When you tune to bufotenine, let's say, so it's like turning that dial, you have the same antenna, like you're still the same receiver sender, but now you're turning that dial to some, let's say you were listening to like, a soft rock channel with your internal natural version. Now you're listening to like the industrial channel or the heavy metal channel with this bufotenine, just to give a dumb example, but that's what it is. You're getting in these states where if it's not what you're used to listening to or being tuned into, all of a sudden you're tuning to that. It's the same with, ergot and other types of things like that, bufotenine, or like psilocybin. Those are a similar idea, I think less damaging than bufotenine in the scale of what amines can trigger and cause for issues long term. Like you mentioned, some people just don't have the same them after that bufotenine experience, which, I don't want to go too far with this, but that kind of may reflect some of what those three or so brackets of neurological issues that we keep talking about in this chat. It may reflect some of what those people experience on the negative side of those neurochemistries. When you all of a sudden do ayahuasca and you get this blast of bufotenine, you're doing the same chemical that is plaguing, on the negative side, plaguing people who have depression or schizophrenia or autistic concerns. So you can see that kind of being in that same idea. But now you've got an idea, or at least a picture, I should say, of a kind of constant state. What would happen with that constant state of ayahuasca intake, that bufotenine intake from ayahuasca. Now you're looking at it in, human disease. So you can see that. Yeah, I definitely see where you're getting at with this idea of like some experience aren't really the best idea in that range. And we're very much that way in my model too. Like we try to say, take as much out as you can for what's impacting your body, and then let your body take over on like building its chemistry correctly, shoring up its immune responses correctly, like retraining its immune cells to take care of these things correctly. So yeah, I'm with you that you can definitely get there. You don't need those other experiences, and they, for some people they can be dangerous. That's what I would say, because I don't want to say speak for everybody, but maybe, make sure what you're doing before any of that stuff comes into your circle. Yeah.
Yes, totally agree. I'm sure that you can achieve that in other ways. And you can say we naturally produce DMT, so we have those pathways naturally, and I do believe ayahuasca is kind of taking the fast lane. Okay, this it's going quickly without preparation, and that's going to open up. It's probably, it could be a good experience, yes, but it could be a very bad long experience. So beware.
Right. Agreed. Yeah.
And finally, Seth, you are fine with it. The last part, I would like to ask you, because I heard about your own experience with in a way, you kind of figure out you were, you had some health issues, I believe. I'm not totally recalling. I believe they're similar to mine, that I've had kind of similar to chronic fatigue and, dizziness and these kind of things, kind of weird. I've had them since I was young. I dealt with them in a different way than you. And well, do you have any practical suggestions for anyone suspecting that they have a mold or fungi issue in their body? Because I think I agree with you. It's from pre-birth. I figured that out in myself. I think it has also to do with something else we cannot say in this platform, that it's, is what they put in us, and especially at that young age. In my case, I figured it had to do something with that.
Mhm.
And so, do you have any suggestion for anyone that maybe has this kind of suspicion?
Yeah, I can definitely go through some things that things that we've figured out. I have a pretty broad perspective from not really running, but being part of this group for so long now, that I keep talking about. We have this, we call it the NAC protocol, is what we call it.
Okay,
It's around
NAC.
online. Yep.
Mhm.
So in my Twitter feed, I have a lot of information on there about it. It's just something that we kind of put out there for people to take a look at, make their own decisions, check with their doctors, check with their pharmacists, whatever it might
Of
be,
course,
whatever's
yes.
appropriate. But it's like anything else. There are steps you can take to kind of shore up your armor, so to speak, a bit. As far as immune response and your immune system and how it's functioning out there, because obviously everyone took a hit over the last 5 or 6 years here. So
Mhm.
you can start by checking mycotoxin profiles, and that's something they can do as simply as like a urinalysis, which you don't always need like a lab order, like a doctor's order to do. There are some private companies that do that around online. Um, I would say that there's an oat test. So I say oat, or it's organic acid profile, basically, that'll show a lot of that
Mhm.
information as well. And that's what we usually use in group for tracking, like progress, so to speak, because a lot of us turn out to have, and I think this is probably because of like predispositions, like you mentioned earlier. Some of those predispositions are set in for people like you and I, and if you didn't have some of those, you might have them now that some of these larger scale disease sets rolled through over the past 5 or 6 years, because it does break things on the immune system. So you'll be able to see and kind of track that, and it depends on the company. Some of them are pricier than others, so shop around, and make sure to check reviews. But those mycotoxin profiles are getting way more common these days. So essentially, you can check. It'll show you like what species and what species groups are present in your system at the time you get analyzed, and then you can check again, say 2 or 3 months out, if you're making adjustments to your
To
diet.
see if you're
Yeah,
getting
see if you're
better.
dropping or at least coming back to
Mhm.
like a better range. You know what I mean? So, we see a lot of people that sit at what I would say is like the lower end of good to zero. And the health returns that we've seen, because of the way that things kind of change, in the markers we're watching, the inflammation getting stamped down, I think is the big thing you want to watch for. And you'll be able to tell when that happens for you. I'm sure you've experienced it. I did, like you mentioned earlier, I had a lot of like chronic fatigue type stuff happening all through life, like inexplicable things the doctor couldn't put their finger on besides, oh, it's this type of infection again. It's like, why do you have that for the fifth time this year? Those kind of things. So you do get whittled down over time by that stuff. So I think keeping an eye on these things, especially into adulthood, when we've been kind of, I don't want to say we've been turned away from understanding what happens internally, but I think it's important to like get back to basics with it and say, okay, we have a certain range of pathogens we're aware of that are focused species. We talk about them a lot, bacteria and viruses out there, but you hardly ever hear that fungal component, right? Like you and I do, because we're kind of by nature acutely aware of it. But most people are like, oh, fungi. I never thought of that. Even like, medical contacts I have are in that same boat. They're like, oh, we got trained to look at bacteria and viruses, and that's our focus, and all these other things. So I would say, um, keep an eye on mycotoxin profiles if you're interested in doing it. They're pretty easy to track. If you're doing anything, make sure that you're listening to your body. That's the biggest thing. You'll be able to tell the changes. Um, and I would say that the ones to keep an eye on in what we see a lot of would be aspergillus. So you'll see like aflatoxins a lot. Candida is a pretty obvious one most people know. One that does not get checked as much as I think it should is Cryptococcus. It used to be a little trickier, but that's one that's really good at setting up quietly. It's good at setting up quietly in the brain and kind of going unnoticed until it's advancing degenerative diseases in that area, like hippocampus and whatnot. And that's one that just goes right from, you inhale it, it sits in your macrophages in your lung for a minute, it hits your blood-brain barrier, it actually breaches it for you. If it's not already breached, it does it for you. And it doesn't even need to be an immune compromised situation. So it keeps making itself smaller until it eventually can disseminate, get into that brain area where it wants to set up shop. So that one is one I would definitely start recommending for checking because it seems to underpin potentially some of what we've termed, like long COVID and like brain fog and COVID and whatnot, they're very similar. They are
Yes.
very similar. You look at other degenerative diseases, kind of like COVID, that result in an immune dysfunction, and you'll see that Cryptococcus rears its head a lot in those cognitive issues. You can kind of find that pattern again too. So those are the three I would kind of keep an eye on. You'll see other ones pop up anyway in these panels, and just keep an eye on that as you progress if you're trying to take care of that and get it removed out of your system. Um, some people, like you said earlier, like either get it out of your home or get out of that home is what some people have taken the track of. Most people in my group, we've figured out various ways to kind of address and remediate a little bit at a time instead of trying to do it all in one shot. So you're still making some progress. So you can do that and you kind of pick away at things if you think there's a bad spot in your home that needs some attention. Look up the right information on how to do it, but you can kind of do that stuff yourself a little bit at a time depending on your situation. So environment and internals, those are the two big things I would say.
Yes.
Keep
Yes.
that clear, you should be better.
Yes. For me, it's almost like I have a radar because like going into a cave, for example.
Oh, no, thank you.
When I
Yeah.
go, yeah, yes,
Yeah,
going
yeah,
into
yeah.
a
No, thanks.
cave, that kind of
Yep.
stuff, I immediately sense it. And I remember we went into a mine a few years ago as a family, and I said, I'm not gonna do it. You guys do it. I'm gonna wait outside because I immediately sense it, and I think it's the darkness, the noise, just the environment. It's just too much for me, and
Mhm.
but I'm mostly fine. I understand what you're saying. I'm mostly fine. For me, the one that came up all the time was glutathione. That I had problems creating my own glutathione, so I supplemented, especially liquid glutathione, and it has gotten better,
Yeah.
in dealing with this. But uh, for me, also garlic. I know you didn't mention it. You mentioned more in the video I saw you. You mentioned antifungals. You know, I think
Yeah. So,
flusamine is one name. Sorry if I'm.
yeah, I think that's one of the brand names for it,
Yeah, brand names.
fluconazole.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
fluconazole is the one I got
Yeah.
first, which you also hear diflucan over here in the US is another
Okay.
term you hear for it. It's interesting you mentioned glutathione because like Candida and aflatoxin from Aspergillus and whatnot, those are specifically damaging like the parts of the processes glutathione shores up. So it's
Yes,
like you're
it makes a
directly
lot of sense.
offsetting it. Well, I mentioned it kind of flatly, but the NAC protocol is N-acetylcysteine, which some people, if you guys out there don't know much about N-acetylcysteine or NAC, there's a lot more data on it now. They've gone through a lot of review on it, and it's actually shoring up in a huge way glutathione stores in the body. So that's why it's funny that that's in our protocol, and you use that on your end already to kind of sort that out
Yes,
for yourself. It's the
I
same.
use the final product because apparently I have issues with my what is called sulfatation pathways,
Okay.
which are the ones that, in a way, NAC is like a precursor for glutathione. So in
Hmm.
a way, I go straight to the final thing. So yes, for me, garlic is so amazing, natural garlic, because I've heard, I'm not sure if it's correct, but it's antiviral, antibiotic, antiparasitic, and antifungal. Okay, the four
Yep.
things. So and it's natural. Yes, it's a little bit hard on the stomach, but if you start getting used to getting it daily, you get better. Also makes blood flow better.
Hmm.
So in a way, it's kind of those things that it's so difficult to find a negative thing on garlic. So, but definitely, if anyone is experiencing from chronic fatigue, from weakness, from this kind of dizzy spells, which is similar to when you also don't, when I get into a home that has a lot of mold, I immediately look around, but I get the dizzy spells, and okay, I see you there, and
Yeah. Yeah. That feeling.
I'm probably respirating some spores or anything like that because
Hmm.
they separate from the mold and they're floating around, and I'm so sensitive to it that even if I'm fine, I immediately sense it. Definitely, I cannot, as you already shared, I cannot eat any portobello or something like that because even if for most people they're fine, for me they are sensitive. Okay, I'm not
Yeah.
saying
Yeah.
they're
I'm with
wrong,
you.
but
Yeah, no,
yeah.
yeah, it is a sensitivity for sure. It's funny that we're talking about that because it's, even when I tried eating anything that was fungi way back, the only ones I could stand, and you probably know what I'm talking about here, are those little marinated button mushrooms. But I
Mm.
think that's because they're soaked in olive oil and garlic. You know, it's like they're not even, whatever was active in there has probably been
It's
degraded by
they're
those, you know?
balancing out.
Yeah, yeah. So it's interesting because garlic, where garlic works for you, what I would look up, that's the compound that's active in there to give you a little science on the backing of why that does what it does. It's called S-allylcysteine, SAC instead of NAC. So it's S-allylcysteine. It's an antioxidant, it's anti-inflammatory. It's very, very close to what NAC does. It's very close to N-acetylcysteine. It even has the sulfite thing going on too, which is why, like you mentioned, it might be a little bit hard on your stomach at first until you get used to that tolerance difference. And it's probably also, honestly, because of the way it works, it's probably knocking out some of what causes those intolerances to begin with. And we've had these weird turnarounds in the group, like allergy stuff. You think about allergies are just allergies, right? Well, what if in truth, allergies are driven not by your own biological responses by themselves, but maybe a parasite or invader that's in there and doesn't like that compound and kicks back chemically for you? So the way I can explain this best is my wife was extremely allergic to strawberries her entire life. The whole time we've been married, she would eat a fresh strawberry and it would make her tongue bleed. Like she couldn't taste it. It was sour. It made her sick. Throat would swell up, that kind of stuff. And she went through cleaning this stuff out, like really went at it. These fungi, so like Candida, all the yeast, everything else, she took it all out of her diet. Her own decision. She went through all her steps to make sure it was good. And then about 6 months into that, it came to be summertime, and she's like, I think I had something that I was eating that was strawberry. And she's like, let me try that because it smells good. And usually she couldn't even smell strawberries, how bad it was for her with these like reactions from whatever was in that pathogenic side. And all of a sudden she can taste them, can smell them, can eat them. It's now her favorite fruit, the sweetest thing she's ever had. It doesn't cause any of those reactions anymore. So mileage may vary, of course, but we've started to really dig into like mast cell response that you hear for allergies and histamine stuff, maybe being a steering from something that's taken up residence around or in them basically, and causing some inflammation response and things that aren't necessarily just you. So, it's I think that there's a lot to this, taking time to check what are your issues. You found garlic and olive oil, of course, as part of your normal routine. On our end, we use oregano oil for some of the pathogenic
Good
stuff.
one. Good one.
Yep. So
Yes.
oregano oil, and we do
Great.
it with the buffers and stuff, so it's not going to burn your, you know what I mean, is all done the right way. And a black seed oil is another one that we use a lot of, which you get a lot of oils. Again, we run into these oils over and over, these things from nature that seem to kind of do the job. And I know we're kind of heading to the end of the episode here, but I would say for people to go out there and look at some old legends. If you're into like woo mindset or anything that's like slightly left of center, go out and look at the old legends and try and track down plants that they mention, like pomegranate, for example, things like that, or oregano, which is holy basil for some people. Or no, I'm sorry, hyssop. Yeah, Syrian hyssop, I think, or something like that. I'm forgetting the exact other name for it, but oregano's got another name, and it was known as a medicine, like a really holy medicine and stuff. So look for those, and then compare them to modern day information. So don't just leave them as a legend. Go and check the current like PubMed, NIH level studies on these plants, and you'll find the compounds are, like you say, antifungal, anti-inflammatory, antiviral, all these weird things that you never expected because we get kind of turned away from it a little bit at a time, from knowing our own nature and bodies and stuff and how it reacts to it. So I think there's value there, is what I would say to you to end things. Yeah.
Yes, and I agree with you. This is not medical opinion, of course. This is
Right.
just
Sure.
for entertainment purposes. But
Yeah.
I believe that allergies, as you say, is not the compound. It's not, some people have not allergies or whatever. Is whatever you have in you, a parasite, a virus, a bacteria, that is dumping off toxins, and that's what you get, the reaction from. So that's why some people have them, some people don't, some people have. For example, really is the mushroom one, the one that is kind of worse. But sometimes from red wine and things with a lot of histamine and stuff like that, I get a little reaction. Very, not as some people that go to the hospital. Okay, so in a way, I totally understand what you're trying to say. That when you fix the root issue, when you fix whatever is causing the toxic or toxin, more than toxin dump, they clear from you. And a lot of people have cleared their allergies, by changing diet, by just changing lifestyle changes. Seth, yes, you're right. We're around 1 hour, so I was wondering if you have anything for us in closure.
Well, I would just say, from what I've learned over the last 3 years, trying to get this theory out further. If you have an idea on something you want to really take a closer look at, just go through the steps slowly. So make sure that what you're doing or what you're looking at or trying to figure out any of this stuff, whether it's health or phenomenon stuff or any of these things, because for me, it's all one big picture that we've kind of had pieces of, and then we set aside or lost track of or forgot. So when you're looking for information on these things, trying to figure out like where it fits for all that you're experiencing out there, just go slow. It sounds trite, but really go slow. If you don't understand like where something's pointing you medically or what's happening to your body or what's happening to you, experiences you're having, you can track those things down. Just take your time. Don't get flustered by it. Don't get, out of hand with it, and just go slow. Take a look at it. I do think that there's a lot of information that's going to start coming up more and more on the landscape related to fungi, and that's both with medical issues and disclosure issues. I'll say that.
Yes, I agree. And I kind of share that with some people that have strange issues that they don't, I mean, most of the things they're going to be caught up by your regular doctor, but not all. And unfortunately, when they don't have a handle to it, creates a problem that for them is like you are, what's going on? So it's not a good thing for a regular doctor not to figure out what's wrong with you. But you know your body better. Okay, you know what you're feeling better. Just try keeping track of what is triggering your symptoms. And that for me, for example, I was very aware that going to a moldy house, going into a cave, that will trigger my symptoms. Going to a very moist place, even moisty days. I don't know if it happened to you. Days that very rainy, very moisty, and that they will, of course, mold will start growing everywhere. So that will trigger something for me. So in a way, trying to keep tab on what's triggering, what's going on with you, and doing a little investigation and finding support groups, because I believe there are support groups of all of these things, is going to probably help you out in case your regular doctor is not able to put a finger on it, because I don't believe this I don't believe these kind of things. I don't know, maybe right now, but like 15 years ago when I tried to seek help, I mean, doctors, if they hear mold, if they hear like, I remember going to a doctor's office and he had mold, okay? He
Oh,
had mold
yeah.
in a corner, and I said, "Are you not concerned about that?" No. For some people it creates a little cough reaction, little inflammation, but there's nothing more of that. And I was like, okay. So
Yeah.
that told me everything I needed to know about that doctor. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think that, it being not as known of an issue is going to change too. Like you said, it's something where it is becoming a little more known, and it was older logic that it couldn't really be an issue. It shouldn't really be an issue unless you're in really dire straits. You're not really going to see it even setting up, being able to establish a foothold in you as a host. And that's turning out more and more to not be true. So I think, for better or worse, on some of the issues with our immunity, um, and autoimmunity is especially, so not just immune gaps, but the autoimmune responses too that we deal with. You'll find fungi are going to be a larger and larger part of that model going forward. It's already started to be more accepted. In fact, I will leave you with a little research, a little homework for everybody. You can go and look up that disease I've mentioned a couple of times. That's what I carry, APSID. And you can find now that they're using that disease specifically, which is fungi only. It has candidiasis in the name for APSID. It's in the term, and that's used as a model now for autoinflammatory disease. So it's right there. It's like kind of proof pudding. It's coming out more and more as we look at it closer. And that's what I think is going to take a scrutiny, Alex, really. So, like I say, COVID kind of popped the cork, and now people are looking at, hey, maybe our immunity is not what we thought it was. Our immune systems aren't really as up to snuff as we thought they were. And I think that's something to watch too. That's another thing I'll leave people with is, keep an eye on where these immune changes that happened as a result of that pandemic, where those are locked in, and you will hear things that, we hear the turbo cancers and things like that are happening out there for people. I would say look closer at known degenerative disease issues related to things like fungi, like APSID, for example, and you'll get a better picture, like a broader picture of how these patterns are playing out.
Yes. Thank you very much, Seth. Thank you very much. I
Yeah, of
really
course.
appreciate you accepting my invitation, and I'm gonna privately suggest you another topic, because I know if you have heard of it or not. I'm very fond of that, but something called black goo. You know if you have heard of that or no?
Mhm. I
Uh,
have, yeah.
yes. So I'm gonna share something privately with you, which I believe there is a connection.
Okay,
Uh,
sure.
and also that one arrived through meteorites, especially out there in Paraguay. South America, and I believe there's a connection there. I feel it. There's a connection there, and so thank you very much, Seth. Have a great
course.
day. Thank you everyone for watching. I hope you enjoyed this one. I know this one was very elevated. Thank you, Seth, for that. But a lot of information, and I truly enjoyed it. This is a topic I'm very fond of. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks again, Alex.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Okay.
Take care. Thank you for making it to this part of the video. This is my favorite part. This is where I suggest to you that you discover your true self. You are not what you have been groomed to believe. You are this incredible being without limits that has eternal life, amazing strength, infinite wisdom, and a big, beautiful heart. All your limits are always self-imposed. Your best version of this reality is inside you. Your only mission on this life is to become a beacon of love and to serve others. This version is ready to be discovered today. How do you discover your true self? The discovery process is a personal one. No one can do it for you. Dedicate 5 minutes a day to talk to the universe. Simply ask, who am I? Where do I come from? What is my purpose? You will start getting signs, breakthroughs, and signals. You will notice how your notions about this reality start disappearing. No more hierarchies, no more competition, no more complaining, no more depending on others. Discovering your true self equals to real freedom. Your self-imposed limits will fall and you will be ready to understand this reality, but you must be patient to allow others to wake up at their time through their own free will. That will be really soon, you will see, and that will set up a new world. As you work towards your best version, you will notice how all emotions don't serve you anymore. Hate, fear, rage, pride, lust, envy, violence, justice through violence, judgment of others, and other emotions will disappear from your mind and heart. You will understand those emotions serve only your egoic mind and are not you. Please try to be understanding of others that don't think or feel like you. Everyone has a process. No one is right or wrong. We're all just different. Don't be concerned about being right, ever. Don't allow pride preventing you from patching things up with family and friends. It is very important you enjoy this life with your loved ones. Put in the work to patch things up and leave it to others to decide. Thank you very much for watching. Please share, like, and subscribe. If you have any comments or suggestions, please use the comment section below. For private questions, conversations, and if you would like to appear on the show, please email me at hey@thealexshow.tv. Thank you again. Please don't forget to visit our website www.thealexshow.tv. By giving me your time, you honor me. Have a very, very, very nice day.